Hello. Welcome to Pohick Episcopal Church, known as the Mother Church of Northern Virginia. I'm the Reverend Dr. Lynn Rinaldi, 16th rector and the first female rector of Pohick Church. And I want to tell you about the spiritual legacy of some of our nation's founders who were formed right here. The original Pohick Church building was a wooden structure erected in the early 1700s just down the street. And the same year George Washington was born, his father was a leader in that church in 1732 on the vestry. Then over the next 30 years, the original church aged, and eventually it needed to be rebuilt. So in the 1760s, Pohick's new generation of leaders began to debate where a more lasting and centralized structure might be erected. Following a spirited debate between George Washington and his friend and fellow parishioner, George Mason, and we have this recorded in our original vestry minutes we still have, the vestry approved Washington's recommendation to build this new brick structure here. Started in 1767, this building was completed in 1774, just 2 years before the Revolutionary War began. Pohick Church was literally the longtime home church of several of the founding fathers and mothers, George and Martha Washington, George and Ann Mason, and William and Sally Fairfax, among others. So at Pohick, we are very aware that our historic church not only has a story to tell about American history, we also have a story to tell about our founders' spiritual formation. Creators and authors of the Fairfax Resolves and later the Constitutions were formed right here, grounded in the Christian principles of freedom, equality, and justice. They were also influenced by an Anglican ethos of moderation, balance, and transformation in love. George Washington biographer Douglas Friedman writes that the two friends, George Washington and George Mason, attended church on July 17, 1774, and then left to craft a draft of the Fairfax Resolves that very afternoon. Their ideals were truly revolutionary for that age and set the infant nation on a unique mission that continues to evolve today. Their vision to become one nation under God with liberty and justice for all was countercultural in their day, and their principles shaped a nation that still struggles to grow into those ideals. Our founders wrestled with contradictions and issues just as we do today. Their spiritual formation was a process as well, just as ours is. Their beliefs and actions evolved over a lifetime. Like us, they experienced periods of intense self-examination, which led to transformed hearts and actions. Slavery was one institution with which they struggled deeply. For generations, Americans grappled with this issue of slavery, culminating in the Civil War. Later in that war, when Confederate troops threatened to seize the nation's capital just up the street, Union soldiers camped right here at Pohick Church, creating a barrier between the rebels and Washington, D.C. Behind me, on the door jamb and on the corners of the church, is graffiti etched by those soldiers engaged in the fight to preserve the Union and abolish slavery. As we enter the doors of Pohick Church, other evidence of Union occupation include the restored boxed pews. The original colonial pews were burned for firewood by the Union soldiers, and they used this place to stable their animals. Later, they were restored with the help of the Mount Vernon Ladies Association. Here at the rear of the church, Pohick has erected a plaque acknowledging and expressing gratitude for all the builders of this building. They include not only the vestry and building committee members like Washington and Mason and others, but also the enslaved persons by name who helped build Pohick Church. We recognize slavery as antithetical to human freedom and equality. From the era of the Civil War through the era of civil rights movement and forward, this country has continued this struggle to make freedom, equality, and justice among all peoples a reality. At Pohick, we are acutely aware of ongoing inequalities and injustices in the world and the need for ongoing racial reconciliation and healing. We seek ways to foster reconciliation, beginning with our own transformation. While we fully embrace our historic and spiritual heritage, we are also very aware that our historic church was built in part by slave labor. How do we know this? Recently, I expressed a desire to recognize all who originally came together as a village to build Pohick Church. In doing so, we intended to acknowledge those who had no choice, the enslaved persons, among others. Our vision was to erect a permanent plaque recognizing all who were involved by name. I challenged Dick Hamley, a Pohick docent gifted in historical research, to search for that evidence. Dick dug into our 1732 to 1785 vestry minutes and the Fairfax County courthouse records. Once he discovered proof of the enslaved people's participation and the names of all involved that we could find, we presented a proposal to the vestry to erect this plaque recognizing and thanking all who built Pohick Church through a labor of love. The vestry and congregation have embraced this long overdue recognition with joy and love. In the process, we have recognized that our spiritual ancestors genuinely grappled with the contradictions of this and other issues. We have seen that their journeys are models of classic spiritual Christian struggle, progress, and transformation. George Washington clearly struggled with slavery. In the end, his beliefs evolved. He essentially repented, freeing his slaves via his last will and testament. He is a model of the Christian journey, not of perfection, but of sincere struggle, repentance, transformation, and growth. In her book, The Only Unavoidable Subject of Regret, George Washington's Slavery and the Enslaved Community at Mount Vernon, Mary Thompson concludes this: "It is a difficult and painful story, but it is also a story of progress and change for the better. In the case of George Washington, he changed into someone who saw that slavery was wrong, that freedom was a right of every human, regardless of race." Another indication of Washington's moderate Anglican ethos and Christian principles is founded in Washington's circular letter to the states in 1783. There, Washington shares his prayer for our nation's godly character. He says, "I now make it my earnest prayer that God would have you and the state over which you preside in his holy protection, that he would incline the hearts of citizens to cultivate a spirit of subordination and obedience to government, to entertain brotherly affection and love for one another, and finally that he would most graciously be pleased to dispose us all to demean ourselves with Christian charity, humility, and pacific temper of mind, which were the characteristics of the divine author of our blessed religion, and without an humble invitation of whose example of those things we can never hope to be a happy nation." Come along now for our virtual tour, which was created with the help of Mount Vernon, for which we're very grateful. See for yourselves the church that nurtured and formed so many of our nation's leaders. Our large, warm, and vibrant congregation today invites you to come experience the love and the presence of the divine author of our blessed religion, Jesus Christ. As we say, come for the history, but stay for our Christian community. We are Pohick Church, home church of George Washington, George Mason, and George Fairfax, embracing our past, welcoming in the present, and transforming for the future.